You know her, you love her. Here she is, Gale. Don't call me Jane Norton. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
It's great to join you, John.
You and I chat a lot about your 4 years as Secretary of the Interior under George W. Bush, and what an amazing but difficult job. You have to have lived through this type of horror in different places in the country when forests are on fire, engulfing homes. And as we record this, yes. It looks like 380 some homes have been lost in the Black Forest fire. What's going on from the government side? What is it that we're not seeing?
Well, whenever you have a forest fire taking place, there's an interagency fire center that brings state, local, federal, military, all of the resources together and coordinates them. And so we have a pretty good system of coordinating firefighting, and you get a lot of cooperation from everybody on that front. It's really what we do beforehand to prevent the fires, where you have a lot of concern and bureaucracy and red tape that we need to deal with.
I guess there are a couple thoughts that pop out. One, before we had the government, there were forest fires, and it was nature's way of cleaning out dead wood. It was also the way of, that's how we took care of things so we didn't get beetle infestations. And now we also, beyond having stopped a lot of fires that might have cleaned up, we're living out in the woods. So a lot of people are saying, this is what you get when you live in the woods. When you live on an ocean front in Florida and the hurricane comes, that's what happens. You're putting yourself in a dangerous spot. So you get it's your fault for being there.
You've identified our two big problems. We don't have natural fires taking place on a regular basis. And so the forests today look a lot different than the forests looked when I was a kid. It used to be that there was a lot of space between trees because the fires would clear out the small trees.
The underbrush, right.
And today we have very dense forests. Part of that is Smokey the Bear. We tried to discourage all forest fires. And yes,
I always hated that bastard. I knew he was no good.
Oh, I like Smokey, but he kind of went overboard. People liked him too well. And so we got the idea that all forest fires were bad. And so for 70 years, we were fighting forest fires. And now there's more of a recognition that you need to have fires. But now that we have people living in the middle of the forest, fire itself is not as good a tool as it historically has naturally been. And so we have to find a substitute. And the way to do that is to have people harvest trees, trim around their houses, and to use
you anti-enviros. That's your problem. You want to rape the land. And actually, let's talk about harvesting. So, I mean, we now have forests that are overgrown. But how do you harvest them? Nobody wants to live in an area where all they see are tree stumps. I read the Dr. Seuss book. I know where all that leads. So, how does that happen? I mean,
well, there are ways you can thin a forest by focusing on the smaller trees instead of the big trees. And in those areas, when you go through the next year, it looks great. And so you can do it in a way that is aesthetically all right. But even beyond that, making sure that we are thinning things out for the health of the forest in the long term. So you have fire breaks. So there are places where when the fire starts coming through, some areas have been thinned, and so the fire essentially slows down enough for the firefighters to be effective.
Who or what is stopping us from doing this? We went through this last year, and it was painful, and it was awful, not only here or up in Fort Collins, but down in Colorado Springs, and now we're hit with it again. We had a whole year to do something about it. Why aren't these things being done?
Well, a lot of it is the bureaucracy, the red tape that is involved in planning. Whenever you want to thin out a forest as a federal agency, you have to go through a lot of paperwork. And that paperwork is multiplied because of litigation. everything that the federal government does to plan for thinning a forest has to be done in a way that's going to withstand litigation.
Well, stop there.
Yes.
Litigation from whom? So, I mean, I'm looking at these homes being burnt. I'm looking at these lives being lost and these families being displaced. Who would sue to stop, to thin a forest to help that situation preemptively?
When I was Secretary of the Interior, the state of Nevada, every single attempt to thin the forest there, someone litigated. And whether it was 100 acres, no matter how small it was, somebody filed a lawsuit.
The state filed a lawsuit, or
no, it was in the state against the Bureau of Land Management, and it was environmental groups. We have pending right now against the Forest Service. There are, I think, 50 or 60 lawsuits pending trying to stop any forest thinning project from moving forward. And so there are people who are going to file lawsuits under the Endangered Species Act, the National Environmental Policy Act. We really have to be looking at the long term. They can more easily prevent a thinning project or other things from taking place if you only look at the short-term impact. But if you look at the long-term impact, that you're increasing the danger that the fire is going to take over the area and destroy the area.
Then what is?
Then
help me speculate.
Consider that.
Why would an enviro group, and they have perfected, I don't think people quite understand how they've perfected the lawsuit in order to stop any sort of building, any sort of dam development, any sort of anything. They have figured this out. The Environmental Defense Fund, the Sierra Club, they understand how to do this. Why would they stop thinning of the forest? I thought they liked forests, and isn't that good for a forest, or are they saying it's even better if it just all burns down with a bunch of homes?
Different groups have different reasons. It might be something local. It might be an endangered species, and their desire to see that the species is treated a certain way, which means not cutting timber. And it, for some of the groups, is just a pure opposition to any commercial activity in the forest. And that's what we really need to make this all self-sustaining. And to have the taxpayers foot the bill for thinning out all of the forests across the western U.S. is really not feasible. And so you need to have industry that's going, it could be biomass, and so using renewable energy coming from the forests. It could be beetle-killed timber. I have to commend King Soopers. I went into one of their stores and saw that their vegetable bins were made of beetle-killed timber that came from our forests. And so that's a great thing. And we have to be encouraging more of that. You have to be creative to find uses for timber here in Colorado.
Because I can understand clear cutting, and that you're taking down the big, huge trees and you're turning them into lumber, which we use to build awful things like homes and schools and hospitals. And I get that, why people wouldn't want that. It's hard for me to see that there's actually business for the underbrush, the smaller trees, the things that you say thinning, but you're telling me there are companies that want that stuff and can sell it. So they will gladly come and take it instead of Uncle Sam actually paying to hire somebody to take it.
It's a marginal business. And so to a certain extent, it's really necessary to encourage that kind of business. And it's from consumers encouraging the products that come from there. It is making sure the red tape is not excessive so that the companies can actually successfully do business. It's allowing them to have long enough contracts that they can really invest and know they're going to have a long-term supply of product. And so there are a lot of different things that need to come together. And Colorado has tried to encourage that. And it's a state issue as well as federal in terms of encouragement. But it's really the red tape that tends to get in the way and make these businesses not
that doesn't
economic.
make news. It makes news when it gets to the point where it's killing people and destroying homes. Let's talk a little bit about firefighting itself, because I've heard differing things here. I've heard that the fire or the forest department is so mismanaged that when they have these big fires, then they go to Congress the next year and they get more money, but they don't really use it to do what they're supposed to do. Right now, we need firefighters. We need roads that actually can get forest firefighters closer to the fires. Last year, there were fewer airplanes than there was the year before, and there were fewer airplanes the year before under Obama to go do these things. Who's in charge?
In the federal budget process, firefighting is one of those things that has to be able to expand to meet the needs. In the Department of the Interior budget, when there's a fire situation, the agencies fighting the fire can borrow from anywhere in the Department of the Interior budget, and so lower priority projects might get put aside to spend the money on firefighting.
So in other words, you got a big fire in Colorado. We're not going to put new benches in the Sierra Madres this year because we got to put those resources to Colorado now to put out these fires.
That's exactly right. In the Forest Service budget, that's within the Department of Agriculture, and all the firefighting has to come out of the Forest Service budget instead of the broader Department of Agriculture. You know, it really ought to be broader borrowing from elsewhere in the Department of Agriculture budget, so there are a lot more lower priority items. What happens with the Forest Service is what gets cut is the fire prevention, the thinning of the forest that's going to prevent the next fire. And so
wait, let me see if I understand this. Because I don't understand government. You're telling me that in order to put out the fires, they take money away from the budget line that will help prevent future forest fires.
Unfortunately, that's what ends up happening.
Am I wrong, or is this just a crazy spiral that can only go in one direction?
This is a real spiral, and it is a very difficult situation that has a fairly easy answer to it, and that is to let them borrow more broadly from the Department of Agriculture budget.
What's stopping them? You say it like that.
The way the federal government system works.
Is it the executive branch, or is there a law that needs to be passed to change this? Is it a mixture?
It would have to go through Congress.
Really?
And so it's the budget committees that deal with all the other Department of Agriculture programs who don't want that to happen. And so it's one of those reasons that the federal government doesn't function very well. But it's also very expensive, and we're seeing so much more acreage burning in the last 10 or 15 years than we have seen in the past. And again, that's going back to the forests are more dense, it is warmer and drier than it has been. We're seeing so many things all coming together to make this a more and more serious problem.
Only got about a half a minute here, but let me ask you, for those people who move into those areas, should the government force them to have an insurance policy that covers this, or is there something we do to discourage that?
We should allow insurers to make their own decisions about what they're going to insure and what they're not, and what the cost is, to require homeowners to take steps that would make the homes more fire safe. Local communities need to look at their building codes. Shouldn't they be requiring fire resistant roofs? There used to be places, so lots of things locally
Gale,
that can be done.
Thank you so much. We need more time. We always need it so much. Thank you. Tell a friend, and we'll see you next week.